should say, Brian Kilmeade. Welcome, everyone. As the Delta variant spreads and COVID cases are on the rise, the president seems to think red states are to blame for the surge, lashing out at governors like Florida's Ron DeSantis over his tough stand against COVID restrictions and mask mandates.
Some governors aren't willing to do the right thing, but you aren't going to help at least get out of the way of the people who are trying to do the right thing.
But Governor DeSantis is fighting back, implying it's the president who is doing the wrong thing on many fronts, including the border.
Joe Biden suggests that if you don't do lockdown policies, then you should, quote, get out of the way. But let me tell you this. If you're coming after the rights of parents in Florida, I'm standing in your way. If you're trying to restrict people, impose mandates, if you're trying to ruin their jobs and their livelihoods and their small business, if you are trying to lock people down, I am standing in your way, and I'm standing for the people of Florida. So why don't you do your job? Why don't you get this border secure? And until you do that, I don't want to hear a blip about COVID from you. Thank you.
Well said from the governor of Florida. As always, Brian, you can sense the fear, the trepidation coming from the Biden White House. This has nothing to do with COVID, these attacks on Governor DeSantis. If it did, you wouldn't have 7,000 COVID-positive migrants being released in McAllen, Texas, with another 1,500 yesterday. If it was about COVID, that wouldn't be happening on our border. This is about fear of a rising star in the Republican Party, make no doubt about it.
Right. They want to distract Kayleigh from the major story. The Delta variant we're unprepared for. The Delta variant that now we had a chance for a year to digest how to do it, how not to do it, since China gave us this pandemic, and they're also being blitzed by it. No one's reporting that. They're being hammered by their own variant on the disease they gave the world. They want to say, hey, let's turn around and go after the rising numbers in the state of Florida. Do you know what the governor said? Mask mandates should be decided by the parents. How dare he? You know what Texas said? Mask mandates is the same thing when it comes to the parents. You know what else they said? We've been through this before. We're not going to be ordered around by a guy that hid in his basement for a year and a half and just wanted to ridicule from the outside. So now we're in a situation that's pretty much uncharted. He made two enemies. I want to take the war on the unvaccinated. I think the American people deserve more respect than that. And I want to take the war to the governor of Texas and the governor of Florida, especially Florida. And I love the way Governor DeSantis really sent a message. I'm not taking any questions. Here's where I stand. Tighten up the border, not to distract you. It's related to the exact thing you're criticizing me for, and I'm done. Close the book, leave the stage, message sent. I don't think Biden wants this fight. I think he wanted the distraction, and DeSantis went right back in his face.
Yeah, he did. Tommy, I think that was the model for how to respond on the COVID issue that we saw from Governor DeSantis. I mean, look, since the beginning of this fiscal year up to June, there have been 1.1 million contacts on our southern border of illegal immigrants crossing. And this comes as in April, the New York Times told us we don't have the testing. They don't have the testing to do this. They're releasing these illegal immigrants across the country. This is how we fight back in this messaging battle.
Exactly, and I'm glad that you brought up what's happening in the state of disaster in McAllen, Texas right now. As you mentioned, thousands of illegal immigrants that are COVID positive. They are in a state of disaster because the Biden administration won't do their job. And so these cities and these states are having to pick up the messy, infected pieces. But I'll also say this, the failed experiments of the lockdowns and the shutdowns and the mandates, we already saw that that didn't work last year. And I'd also like to say, when it comes to Florida, let's keep in mind how many liberals fled from other states like New York, California, and came to states like Florida during the pandemic for freedom. But now they want to reverse course, and now they want to shame Governor Ron DeSantis when many of them moved there for the leadership and the freedom provided by Governor Ron DeSantis. Keep leading, keep being strong, keep standing for freedom. Ron DeSantis has a bright future ahead, and I know that it gives all of us a whole lot of hope when we're looking at all these restrictions, looking at all these mandates, and we're looking at governors like DeSantis and Abbott and Kristi Noem, and we're saying thank goodness for you, because you are protecting our freedom.
That's right. And Shannon, COVID-19 has provided a real juxtaposition between states. There's really two models. There's the Florida model, Texas model, or New York and California model, where, responsibly, Governor DeSantis has said, get vaccinated, but we're in a different place. We're not locking down. We're not having mandates. We have a vaccine now. And I think the numbers tell the story. As Tommy just pointed out, there have been nearly 300,000 residents that have come to Florida from April 2020 to April 2021, while meanwhile, you see California and New York have had an exodus out of their states. People are choosing the DeSantis model.
Yeah, and I think what happens here is this is a very open flank for the Democrats politically. They've got this situation where people see dissonance. I mean, they see what's happening at the border, and then they hear in places like New York, if you want to go to Chili's, you're going to have a vaccine passport. So you can come across the southern border with a lot less trouble without proper ID, possibly having COVID, us not knowing the results of whether you've been tested or not. And these are human beings who need our help and need assistance, especially if they're sick. But if you're asking the American people to sacrifice, to give up some of their own liberties, to mask up again, to potentially mask their kids, people will go with you if they think you're on the same side. But if they feel a sense of hypocrisy, which they do about the border, and it's not just Republicans who have been pointing it out and complaining about it, it is Democrats, especially those in those border towns and cities who say, we are overwhelmed. We're having to build tent cities for people. We need the Biden administration to listen to us. That's coming from Democratic members of Congress. So it's not just Ron DeSantis they've got a problem with over the border. It's Democrats, too. And the American people see that is something that just doesn't line up for them.
It doesn't line up at all, Emily. And going back to COVID-19, President Biden was dealt a very good hand. President Trump oversaw the creation of the vaccine, manufactured millions throughout the private sector. Working therapeutics were given to this new incoming president. PPE was in full supply and abundance. And now look at the numbers of how Biden is handling this, how the American people are perceiving it. The new Quinnipiac poll, let's put it up, puts the president's approval rating at 46%, down from 49% in May. Not a great number. Also, the president's handling of COVID-19 pandemic falling to 53%, down 12 points from May. So now he's hit some pretty troublesome waters. What do you make of those numbers, Emily?
Right, they're not surprising at all, Kaylee. You're absolutely right that President Biden inherited a recipe for success in managing the COVID pandemic, including a precedent of 1 million vaccinations being administered twice in January, that same month in this year. And yet he has continued to fail and let everything fall apart. Governor DeSantis was absolutely right to call out his blatant hypocrisy. Even though the White House thinks that no one can see through their sham messaging and that it's Oz, any reasonable person can see exactly how, as you put it, the two models in play in the country, how exactly it's ending up. We have a commander-in-chief that has allowed the southern border flood of migrants to become a festering wound of inhumane conditions, decimation of law and order, prioritization of narco cartel industries, i.e. human smuggling and drug smuggling, and super spreading catalysts as they ship these poor people throughout the country. We have district attorneys and governors throughout our country that are raising the alarm, in addition to legal nonprofits, international NGOs, about these conditions, about the treatment of COVID pandemic, the complete lack of management of it whatsoever. And yet now we have other states that are joining their law enforcement together to help protect the border, to do what our commander-in-chief refuses to do, which is solidify the border and protect American citizens. This response is absolutely preposterous. And for President Biden to go after one of the few in leadership who actually does have our best interests in mind is appalling.
Yeah, the American people won't stand for this. A porous border, COVID positive, illegal immigrants flooding across the border. And meanwhile, in New York, you've got the vaccine mandates. You've got to show a card to go eat at a restaurant here in a few months. They're not going to stand for this. Coming up, Governor Cuomo is facing a looming impeachment and potential criminal charges, but he still refuses to resign. And calls are growing for CNN to fire his little brother. All that next.
Veteran homeowners. While mortgage rates are still near all-time lows, home values just keep going up. Now's the time to refi and take out cash. The New Day 100 VA loan lets you borrow up to 100% of your home's value. You could take out 50
articles of impeachment to the Senate as soon as possible.
All right, Shannon, impeachment, civil suits, criminal investigations underway. Are the curtains closing for Governor Cuomo, or as the New York Post calls it, is this creep on the ropes?
Well, listen, we just re-showed the video that he and his team put together of him kissing everyone. And as a former sex harassment attorney, I am just aghast at that. I don't know who advised him to pre-produce that and put that together. It's just so super creepy. I think it actually hurts him. But you're right. He is facing trouble on so many fronts, politically and potentially legally as well. And don't forget, there are still groups who are investigating the nursing home situation, even though the DOJ has bowed out of that. We see all of the Democrats for months and those who are doing it this week, including from the president on down, saying he's got to resign. Well, that gives them cover because they know he's not going to. It all comes down to this impeachment issue and potentially the criminal charges as well. It's up to those state lawmakers there now to decide if it is politically advantageous for us or it's just simply time for them that they actually have to do this, that there's nothing left. They have plenty of political cover from the AG's report. It's whether they have the will to do it there at the state level.
And Kaylee, Shannon mentions the White House calling for resignation, but they still haven't committed to a position if he refuses to resign.
That's right. Shannon's exactly right. They're calling for him to resign, but they know he's not going to. So further than that, impeachment, when President Biden was asked about that, do you support impeachment? He said, let's take one thing at a time. Jen Psaki was asked this at the podium yesterday, basically said the same thing, leaving that to the state lawmakers. She then was asked, well, have you even called? Has the president called and urged Governor Cuomo to resign personally? No, he doesn't even have plans to do that. And then you go even a step further. Do you plan to take away his leadership role, Governor Cuomo's leadership role on the COVID call between state governors? Which, pause for a moment. Why is Cuomo leading COVID calls with state governors after he's responsible for 15,000 seniors being put back in nursing homes and losing their lives? But no, she would not even commit to removing him from that position. So aggregated all together, no call for impeachment, no personal outreach to say step down, no removal of his leadership role in the call. This was a pro forma call to resign. It was empty. It has no teeth to it. And the White House should be really ashamed of how they handled this. They should be saying impeachment from the rooftops, but they are not.
Okay, and Brian, let's talk about the governor's brother here. So Chris Cuomo was mentioned multiple times in this Attorney General report, and that he participated actively in essentially the smear campaign, first of all, that this administration engaged in, and also in all of the PR management of his brother, including weighing in on drafting of press releases and the like. And now the calls for CNN to take formal action against Chris Cuomo are coming from the entire spectrum. Your thoughts?
A couple of things. I'm not going to comment on someone's job status. I'm not going to tell CNN what to do, but I will say this. The biggest mistake ever was a year and a half ago for him to sit there and kid around with his brother, and then he just breached all protocol. Having said that, how do you all of a sudden make a stand and say he can't talk about his brother, now he's in trouble? Only good news? Have you ever heard of a journalistic standard where I'm allowed to promote and talk about good news about a family member, but not bad news? He's in the middle of it. And then there's this report today that Fox News obtained that there were indications behind the scenes that they pulled him aside and say, listen, you know you're a lawyer. We know he's your brother. We know you want to help him. So go help him. Your job is still going to be here when you get back. That you can understand, especially you, Emily. As a lawyer, you probably have family and friends calling you all the time asking for help. But at which time you make a decision. You know what? I got to focus over here. He probably would have kept his paycheck. What a huge problem. But not only does he do that, he inserts himself in the process and he takes the lead. If I'm a Cuomo staffer, I'm like, really? So in a time of trouble, you actually go get your family members? You leave me out to dry? Therefore, he alienated staff. He alienates CNN. He alienates an executive at CNN who has links to him. And now the whole network is angry at your 9 o'clock anchor who didn't care enough about his own employer to get out of the way. But in terms of firing, let them handle it. In terms of who's watching him, I think his number is going to even drop more once the spectacle ends, if that's possible.
Tommy, Brian's color commentary was spot on. And now the viewers are sort of saddled with this awkwardness, right? Last night in the ticker tape on the bottom third of the screen of Chris Cuomo's show, it's talking about the governor and the results and being a sexual harasser and everything. And then he's not talking about it. And then in the handoff with Don Lemon, he's like, I love you, brother. The governor of New York is totally disgraced. I mean, it's so awkward. And to Brian's point, the door was opened by Chris himself.
What do we really expect from CNN, though? I mean, at this point, are any of us really shocked? Any of us really surprised? I'll tell you what this is, though. This is another case of what we call liberal privilege. We are in a time now of cancel culture. Cancel culture will go after you for about anything, especially conservatives. They will go after you about anything. They will tell you that you need to lose your job. They will tell you need to go live in a hole. You were shamed. You were silenced. You were censored. But now you have a real situation here, a real conflict of interest, a real breach of journalistic integrity, if CNN has any at all anyway. And no calls for cancel culture here. Now, I'm not saying I'm calling for it. I agree with Brian. I think CNN is going to make their own decision. I would never call for someone to lose their job. But Chris Cuomo has to pick a lane. He can't have it both ways. He can't have his cake and eat it too. Pick a lane. But once again, another example of that good old liberal privilege, especially in the media.
That's right. We've seen bigger people toppled for less. And frankly, the victim shaming, the retaliation engaged in by these guys is sickening. And I do hope we can look forward to some accountability somewhere despite that liberal privilege. Just ahead, the Mexican government is now suing American gun makers, saying it's their fault that cartels have inflicted nationwide bloodshed. But critics say Mexico just wants a scapegoat. The unusual lawsuit next.
Do you know which investment could be your best performer this year? Stocks? Real estate? Bonds? None of the above. It's silver. It's trending higher. And if silver returns to its all-time high, that's over an 85% increase from current levels. Call now for the Silver Forecast. First-time callers get this free 1-gram silver bar.
If I could only invest in one thing, it'd be silver. It's in short supply. It is one of the
news. AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka has died. It is just trickling through Washington here. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer just on the floor moments ago, choked up and emotional and talking about Trumka's death. He was a powerful man, as you know, heading up the union, represents some 12 million workers. Sources are saying it's believed he died of a heart attack. This was unexpected, either late yesterday, early today. He was 72 years old, has been a big advocate for the Biden administration, a strong supporter of Democrats and organized labor for many, many years. Again, at the age of 72, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka has died.
We'll be keeping him in our prayers. Mexico taking America's gun manufacturers to court. Defendants use reckless and corrupt gun dealers and dangerous and illegal sales practices that the cartels rely on to get their guns. But critics say Mexico is just looking for a scapegoat.
And it's the job of the Mexican government to bring these cartels to justice, arrest them, and put them out of business. You shouldn't be blaming law-abiding members of the firearms industry in the United States who comply with the law and sell guns legally.
Emily, this is a rather unusual lawsuit. The Mexican government saying that 70% of firearms obtained illegally in their country are from the U.S. They claim that these guns are responsible for 17,000 homicides. Again, that's the Mexicans' claim. There is a much different claim made by the Firearms Association. But what do you make of this lawsuit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is the first time that a foreign government has sued United States manufacturers. And yes, they're arguing that 70% of those trafficked illegal guns come from the United States. These guys are seeking $10 billion in compensation, Kaylee, and that figure of 17,000 homicides was for the year 2019 alone. Now, what they're arguing in terms of standing is that the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which protects gun manufacturers, that it only applies to damages in the United States. So it will be interesting to see actually if it makes it through the door on that count. But on the flip side, as you started to allude to, like, the argument is that, look, these allegations are baseless. The Mexican government is responsible for the rampant crime and corruption within their own borders, right? They're responsible for enforcing their own laws. And there's also issues being taken with the figures and statistics cited in this lawsuit, essentially that they only looked at a fraction of the firearms using serial numbers. So, of course, the large portion of which would be able to be traced back to the United States. But bottom line, even if this lawsuit does come to fruition, it will be extremely difficult to show that the distribution process is actually a manifestation of negligence on the part of the gun makers here.
Yeah, and Shannon, UCLA law professor Adam Winkley calling this lawsuit, quote, a long shot. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, this conversation goes on and on here in Washington so often about whether these gun manufacturers should have liability or protection, where it should go. So that political conversation goes on with this as well. I do think it's a long shot, but you got to remember these gun manufacturers here in the U.S. are under a lot of duress as well, not only legally, but you've got things like banks and funding sources threatening that they're not going to do business with gun manufacturers anymore. So as the left and, you know, a lot of folks want to come after them legally, they're going to try other ways as well, and they're going to be very supportive of what Mexico is trying to do here. They do have a mess with cartels and political leaders, law enforcement leaders regularly assassinated and taken out there. It probably is an easier avenue for them to go after the manufacturers than it is to try to get a handle on that, which by most accounts is completely out of control.
Yeah, and as Emily noted, those serial numbers, they looked at a small segment of guns. So those numbers were a bit distorted. At least that's the claim of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Brian, who said this in response. These allegations are baseless. The Mexican government is responsible for the rampant crime and corruption within their own borders.
So, Kaylee, where did he get the idea? Where did Mexico get the idea? I don't know. The President of the United States saw crime rising in every major city in America. And who did he blame? Not the guy shooting, not the guy shooting the other guy. How about the people that deal the guns and sell the guns? So Mexico says, I got an idea. Let's sue the gun makers. They got a lot of money, and let's sue the gun dealers. Exactly what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Blaming, they're doing it legally. A couple other things. Mexico, if you're upset about it, why don't you tighten the border? If you tighten the border on your side, we're unwilling to do it on our side. That'll help us stop with the gun smuggling. The other thing I'd have the problem with, those people that don't file taxes, cartels that are more powerful than their sitting government. Maybe you want to get on top of them and stop drilling around the edges. That would really get to the bottom of it, because I don't believe they were playing intramural basketball until we started making guns in America. And then instead of playing basketball, why don't you shoot each other? It wasn't our idea. We're giving you we make the weapons, they get the weapons illegally, and they shoot each other illegally, and you have no business, and you have no ability to stop them. But if you want to do one thing, I would tighten the border. I'd be in support of that.
Yeah, and they were tightening the border with President Trump. Obrador and Trump had a fabulous relationship. They were working with our country. Now this has disintegrated, Tommy. Now you have Mexico accusing USAID of supporting a coup. You have the president calling President Biden a migrant president. This relationship has just crumbled.
Well, it certainly has, but we had the leadership of President Trump, who had to threaten Mexico with tariffs and then got them to actually do their part in securing the border. I know because I saw it firsthand in that little city of McAllen, Texas, which is now declared a state of disaster. But I'll also say this. If you want to talk about funding the cartel, there are two people to blame, and one of those people sits in the White House. That's the Biden administration. By having an open border, you are essentially giving the cartel an open-ended check. But then also Mexico is to blame as well. They're not cracking down on their cartel. They're not cracking down on the border. They're not helping us secure the border. They're happily ushering people right on into our country. That's why we need to make sure that they're remaining in Mexico. We need to get tough on Mexico. And I'll tell you one last thing. You know who loves gun manufacturers? The American people. A record number of sales last year, and we're only going to see that continue so long as we can. We love the Second Amendment in this country, and boy, would we love a secure border to boot.
Yep, and I don't think their problem is U.S. gun manufacturers. They should look at the cartels. That is the problem.
Finding that it had taken 16 just this year alone. That's about one every 2 weeks, with many occurring within Massachusetts, going from Martha's Vineyard to Boston International Airport. Now, John Kerry is the president's point person in the effort to lower greenhouse gas emissions. So all this is raising questions about just how much his own family is contributing to that problem. Here's how Kerry addressed this issue of his private jet before.
It's the only choice for somebody like me who is traveling the world to win this battle. I negotiated the Paris Accords for the United States. I've been involved in this fight for years. The time it takes me to get somewhere. I can't sail across the ocean. I have to fly.
So, Tommy, is he traveling around the world battling this issue to Martha's Vineyard back and forth 1,000 times? This guy's ridiculous.
You know, in his mind, he is. And I'll never forget that image as well of John Kerry unmasked on that American Airlines flight. But you know what? I'm thinking about a capitalistic venture for myself. Maybe a coffee table book filled of liberal hypocrisy, because they seem to do it on a daily basis. And they're rarely ever called out on it, besides those of us here on Fox News and some other independent journalists in the media. But, you know, I'll say this. We've got my home state of South Dakota that has a permanently canceled Keystone XL pipeline because that was supposed to be horrible for the environment. It wasn't, by the way. But then you've got people like Kerry riding around in private jets. You've got Jeff Bezos shooting into sky for a 10-minute joyride. You've got all these liberals talking out of one side of their mouth and then doing the other out of the other side. It's absolutely ridiculous. And meanwhile, average Americans that are reliant on those jobs in the energy sector, they're the ones that are suffering. They're the ones that told that they need to sacrifice for the greater good. It's absolute BS, but it just shows that those liberals that put themselves up on this pedestal and they think that they are better than the rest of us and they think they can get away with anything. And the problem is they usually can.
So, Kilmeade, to Tommy's point about the average American, most of us are sitting around in airports with delayed or canceled flights, watching everybody beat each other up and getting duct taped to seats. This guy's cruising back and forth to Martha's Vineyard to Boston on this gorgeous jet and defending it with the hubris that he is the one that has to be there quick as possible so he can combat these greenhouse gas emissions issues. But where is the calling out for this blatant hypocrisy?
I know, it's unbelievable. Evidently, he needs a plane to quickly, for good of Earth, my favorite planet, he needs to quickly get to Martha's Vineyard and quickly get to Idaho. Evidently, his wife loves Idaho, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When asked about this, he said, I have offsets. I got time. What are your offsets? What else are you doing? Oh, that's right. To save the planet, you're also on your yacht a lot. So that really saves you, keeps you out of the plane. I'm sure that doesn't burn any fuel. Wait a second, it does burn fuel. It's unbelievable. They want all of us to sacrifice. They never want a sacrifice period. That's why no one listens to them. And when you go and criticize and say, you know, this whole climate change thing, I got some questions about it. They think you're the worst person on the planet for asking questions about science. Same thing with the pandemic. It's like a Seinfeld episode. It's a perfect circle. We close the whole loop. We start with the pandemic, we end with John Kerry's plane.
And Kaylee, no matter what the facts say, to Brian's point, to the average American that is seeing this hypocrisy, that saw the Trump administration believing in science as well, all they were being told the whole time is that that prior administration didn't believe in science, and this one uses science as a complete guide, and therefore they are absolved of all of this hypocrisy, all of these ridiculous decisions, simply because it's under that narrative that has been pushed by the progressive left and the media that enables them.
Yeah, that's right. No one believes these inauthentic, committed activists who continually flout their own causes. It's John Kerry. It's also Al Gore. Al Gore's Tennessee home, according to one study, a year's worth of energy in that home is enough to fuel 21 homes in this country. His pool alone, 7 homes. His pool, that is his pool. This is amazing. The hypocrisy is rancid, but it happens all the time, and they always have an excuse. And with John Kerry, it's I'm somebody like me doesn't have another choice. Well, yeah, you did. You could have accepted that award here, could have accepted it virtually, but this is what they do. Like Lori Lightfoot saying, yeah, I know I got a haircut when no one else could, but I'm the public face of the city and I'm on national television. That was literally her response. People see through it. They reject it. I certainly believe that.
Shannon.
Yeah, what it ends up doing is hurting your argument, because if people see you doing these kinds of things, they think you don't actually believe the underlying argument that the environment is being harmed, or that masks are necessary, that lockdowns are necessary. If they watch you violate all of these guidelines that you've set up, you know, you're hurting your own argument, because they don't believe fundamentally you think those actions are actually making any difference at all. So you do so at your own peril. But I got to tell you, if I was some super fancy rich person, the one thing I'd get rid of first was commercial air travel if I could get around it. Nobody loves that these days.
Right.
Very true. I would add also a chef. All right, up next, squad member Cori Bush defends calling to defund the police while having private security, saying she has private security because, quote, my body is worth being on this planet right now. Oh my gosh, our